Hello and welcome to Yesterday's Coffee, the podcast where we chat about fitness, nutrition, and business all over coffee that may or may not have been brewed yesterday. Today, we are going over how did you want to phrase this? What is it we're talking about today?
A video for the people who feel like they're not making progress even when they're doing everything right.
When you're doing everything right, yes. That's it.
For the people who are doing everything right today.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this is a pretty common sentiment that we get from clients about, being a little frustrated that they're not making progress or not making progress as quickly as they want to, and they're upset. And sometimes they let it kind of throw them off track and they spiral a little bit because they feel like they're putting all this time and all this effort into it and they're doing everything right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if that's you, if you're having those thoughts, it's good to kind of take a step back. Number one is not to do anything rash. Don't all of a sudden just give up on all of your goals. Don't go out and have a huge binge or have a night out and just completely forget about everything that you've worked for so far.
Mm-hmm.
I think you really need to communicate, number one, if you are working with a coach, I guess.
Yeah. Because the first thing you need to realize is when it comes to making changes physically, there are a million different factors that go into it. And if you're in a place where you're following along with the plan and you're not seeing progress because your weight is staying the same or whatever metric you're going on is kind of stuck, then you're really not very far away from making progress, right? Because you're at that maintenance level. And so for whatever reason, what you've been doing hasn't gotten you over the hump, but you're not that far away if you're maintaining what you're doing.
Well, and I think, okay, so you're making the assumption that this person is staying completely stable and completely normal. The other thing to bring up, I think, are your expectations of how quickly you should be progressing.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's another situation that I hear this phrase a lot of the time is when somebody, only loses 2 pounds in 2 weeks. And they're like, well, what's going on? Why am I not losing weight faster? I'm doing everything right. And I think the real number one should be understand what your expectations are or understand what the realistic rate of progress is. If you're working with a coach, this is a great time to be listening to them because generally they'll tell you what to expect. And if you're not, we've talked about this in the past, that rate of weight loss, a good rate of weight loss is really anywhere from, half a pound lost in a week up to maybe 2 pounds lost in a week. So just because you only lost half a pound 2 weeks in a row for 1 pound in 2 weeks, that doesn't mean you're stuck. That absolutely doesn't mean you're stuck. You're making progress and you need to be able to recognize the progress that you're making. Could some changes be made to, increase that rate of progress? Maybe. I think, again, if you're working with a coach, that's a good time to check in with them and kind of get their feedback on the situation, or hold out for a couple more weeks on your own, see if that stalls out, if that's really, continuous progress week after week. Maybe you just need to make some small tweaks and take yourself up to, that 1 pound loss per week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So obviously the expectation's a huge part, and understanding what's realistic. I think a lot of times people get inflated ideas in their head just because there are stories out there of people making ridiculous progress.
It happens
in certain short amounts of time. And yeah, it's possible for certain individuals with the right scenario around them. But it's very uncommon. Like we've worked with so many hundreds of people, maybe over 1,000 at this point, and can probably count on one or two hands how many times we see that. And it really is a number of factors. There's kind of like a perfect storm that has to go into it. Somebody that their metabolism is high enough to the point where making changes can warrant a massive amount of weight loss in a particular time, just because they've been keeping their calories so high for so long, or doing that in conjunction with no activity. So you start introducing a few good quality habits at the same time.
People who diet for the first time ever with a coach see amazing results.
A lot of times, yeah.
I can't I guess, focus on that point enough for people who have gone through diets over the years. You need to understand that if you've gone through a lot of diets and you've kind of yo-yoed throughout your entire life, your body learns from those cycles every single time, which does make it a little bit harder for you, or it means that your progress might be a little bit slower.
Right. Yeah, no, if you've been a chronic dieter that's tried a million different things, that can absolutely influence your progress, especially if you do start down the path with a coach, depending on where you're coming into this process, where your metabolic rate's at, what your calories have been sitting at to keep you at maintenance or gaining weight. There's a million different factors there, and sometimes there is a very slow rebuilding process that you've got to go through to get yourself in a place where you can see those types of results. So the expectation piece is huge, but different than that is the idea of what it means to be doing everything right.
That's very important.
Yes.
Very important.
Because this oftentimes gets very lost in the conversation.
I get, messages from people a lot, or check-ins from clients, and this is not me judging them or trying to make anybody feel bad. This is just, reality. This is what happens is sometimes, people are a little bit vague with how they describe their compliance. So, I'll get check-ins that say, did really good with my meals this week, frustrated that I'm not seeing progress, feel like I'm doing everything right. And from a coaching perspective, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what doing good means. So we need to make sure that however you're judging what good looks like matches your coach's interpretation or your coach's, idea of what good is or what compliance is.
Well, and typically when you unpack what most people mean when they say they did good, and you start to go into the kind of specifics as to what it is that they're labeling good as, sometimes they have nothing to do with what the actual plan is. So like
sometimes it could mean that they're just eating what they think good foods are, or they're cutting their calories actually way too low because that's just kind of what they've been taught forever.
No, I've definitely seen that. Like
over exercising,
any number of things. Like when we put together a plan, obviously the best case scenario is that the client follows it exactly, because then we can assess, all right, this is what we put in place. This is the progress we did or didn't see. Here's how we can adjust this sensibly. If that isn't happening, or if there's just a ton of variance through the week, and this is something else that I see a lot, where maybe Monday through Wednesday are really, really good. And then Thursday, it gets a little shaky. Friday and Saturday kind of fall off the boat. Weigh in on the weekend, weight didn't really go anywhere, and you're disappointed because you feel like I worked so hard in the first half of the week. And then
in comparison, that might be a huge step for you.
Right, it might be.
I'm not downplaying anybody's hard work and not saying that those people aren't working hard enough. That's not what we're saying, because we do absolutely see that that's probably a huge shift for you. But again, we need to make sure that we're both on the same page about what compliance looks like.
Yeah, and the other thing you need to think about is, if I, as a coach, am trying to put you in a caloric deficit to aim for that 1 pound per week, which, if we're generalizing, is about a 500 calorie per day of deficit, and you're really good with that 3 or 4 days out of the week, and then you have a couple really bad days, or interspersed with that, you've missed some of the planned activity that we had to get to that mark. Then you could very easily wipe out what would have been a week of progress. But I think even more than that is just understanding the importance of energy values and how this all relates to the way that your weight changes. So many times, especially with like brand new clients or people that have never done this before, you'll get the whole thinking that doing really well in the week is I didn't eat out, or I ate vegetables, and great, those are both great things, but the foods themselves and the quantities and the amounts are really where the importance lies, because like we've said many times before, the foods aren't special. There's no fat loss food, there's no mass gain food, it's the quantities. And you can take the same meal structure, change the quantities, and go from a fat loss diet to a mass gain diet. So yeah, you might be choosing the right foods, but if you're not choosing the right quantities or sticking to those properly, then there's no telling where things can end up. Just because you ate chicken and rice and some vegetables,
and those are good choices,
and you had healthy fats and stuff like that, yeah, all amazing foods, but I could very easily give that to a bodybuilder that's trying to put weight on and just feed him enough of it, and he's going to put on weight.
Definitely. That's one of the factors that you should, take a step back and look into is, are your portions where they should be, where they need to be? Are you paying attention to the portion sizes? If you're doing this on your own and your goal has up to this point just been to make better choices, which is a great place to start. Like, I can't say that enough. You don't have to be perfect overnight. That's not the expectation, but your rate of progress expectations need to match the effort that's being put in. So slow steps are great. But again, I think it's worth taking a look at, do I need to be more specific? Do I need to hone in on looking at my exact calories or my exact portion sizes, my macros? If you have already kind of taken that step, are you making sure that the log is accurate? Are there things that you're forgetting to log? Is the log wrong? Because that can happen too. It might not be your fault, but you do have to be a little bit aware.
I've got a really good story, and I'm not going to name names here, but if he's listening to this, he's going to know exactly who I'm talking about. I had a client reach out to me, or we were just discussing like changes to his diet plan. He's made tons and tons of progress over the years, so he's done great. But I was literally blown away by this. We were talking about changing his macros and looking at different things, and he texted me the next day and he's like, I think I'm eating too much protein. And I was like, okay, how much protein do you think you're eating? And he's like, I'm getting like 500 or 600 grams a day. And first of all, I just started cracking up laughing and I replied to him. I was like, man, that would be like 6 or 7 pounds of meat per day. I promise you're not eating that much protein. And what he was doing was just thinking of like protein sources of food and then taking the exact weight of the food in grams, but only attributing that to protein. So like 600 grams of overall weight, which is like 1.25 pounds.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
So instead
there was like a gram confusion
because the macronutrients are like, it's a weight. It is weight based because it's mass based because it's in grams, but foods are very rarely just one
pure
protein. Yeah, like if you're talking about like sugar, the grams that you have of sugar is going to be your grams of carbohydrates because that's all it is. Yeah. But
like even something that's like the leanest protein source ever, you've got water there. So you the grams are never going to exactly match up.
Exactly. So it was just, and that's a perfect example of somebody that thinks they're doing it right, but the whole idea of it is just completely wrong. Like everything about that is 100% wrong, and we laughed about this a lot.
And that's an honest mistake. No, I mean, that happens like, all the time.
I told him, I was like, you're too smart for your own good, because anybody with less intelligence wouldn't have thought this. Like it's
actually impressive.
It's a rational thought, but it's 100% wrong. So just getting clarified on what it is that you're actually doing, making sure that you're doing it right and you're accounting for things right. Serving size errors are probably one of the biggest things out there.
It's the biggest problem with food logs in general.
Even somebody that kind of understands what they're doing, if you're not careful, you can very easily miscalculate or add things up improperly. And then if you are somebody that's been meal prepping and doing the same thing over and over again, and you added it all up in the beginning and it was wrong, that could be a big problem. And so just if things are really stuck and you feel like I'm doing this right, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, just wipe the slate clean, start fresh, re-log and count everything and see, just to make sure that this is where you think you are relative to the plan.
Yeah. Well, and it's also important to know that there can be some very large logging errors, but it doesn't always look like that. It might be really small things. And so if you kind of take, a couple missed food items on your food log, maybe you missed some sauces or some condiments, maybe you missed a snack, then you add that on top of maybe 1 or 2 things were logged improperly, and then you stack that with maybe you missed a cardio session or a workout that week, and all of these things kind of stack up and add up across the week. You still did great. Like, it was still a really successful, productive week. We don't always need to measure our success with, I guess, forward motion towards that ultimate weight goal. There are a lot of other ways that we can judge your success in a week. But again, those things are going to all add up, and that, I guess, progress isn't always going to show up on the scale.
Yeah.
So then we need to take what we've learned from that week. Someone can point out to you, or maybe you go back and you look through everything and you find a couple errors or a couple mistakes. Take that, learn from it, and then go into the next week and make those adjustments.
And don't also just stake everything on the scale too, because there's so many times where I'll have clients transition to a much healthier diet, much healthier routine. And one of the first things that they'll tell me is how much more energy they have and how much clearer they can think and how much better they feel. And then if they step on the scale at the end of the week and nothing's moved, they just get totally distraught. And it's like, obviously this is a metric that we want to move. I get that. I understand your disappointment, but don't throw everything else away that you've already improved so much that
you feel amazing.
Yeah,
why is that not exciting?
Like that is huge right there. Sure, we might not have the quantities perfect, whether that's the plan that's the issue or it's the execution that's an issue. We'll kind of, the better you are at logging and tracking and communicating, the faster we'll figure out what's going on there. But don't throw away the progress that you've made.
And the other thing is, a lot of times there's internal progress that needs to be made first, right? Like, we need to set up an environment inside your body where your body is receptive to those changes, where your body is in a position where it will let go of fat tissue. So a lot of those changes that Kyle's talking about let us know that we're doing the right thing. It lets us know that we're creating that internal environment where the outside of your body will start to respond. So I would say that that's the foundation, and that those improvements should probably come first in an ideal world to build on.
An ideal world is really interesting because, we are working with humans.
Yes,
and
we are. It's hard to get that point across.
There is, this is, coaching people is a very interesting thing because there are a number of things that we can look at in research and anecdotally that work really well, but it has to be balanced out by the psychology of the person. And so there are so many instances where the changes that I might make to somebody's plan are a little faster than I would ideally want because I need to keep them mentally engaged.
That can be tough sometimes.
In a perfect world, as Alexa said, if we could just download into your brain, this is the steps that we need to take, and these first few months, we're not even going to look at the scale because we got to fix a myriad of other things first.
We've got to address all these other things.
And then we'll be able to transition to that once we've built this platform to go off of. That would be great, but that's not realistic.
They don't.
So a lot of times, and this isn't like me trying to make an excuse, but there's a lot of times where a coach has to balance out what's best for the client and what are they expecting realistically, and how do I merge these things together to try to keep them happy and engaged in this process, because if I don't, they'll fall off. But at the same time, not push things so far that I know that I'm going to put them in a hole just because I was trying to satisfy their egoic needs, right?
Well, because I would honestly say that ideally I would put my ideal rate of weight loss for clients, kind of closer to that 0.5 to 1 pound per week lost, because that really allows you a lot more flexibility in your life, which that is what people want, truly.
Right.
They'll say that they want to do whatever they can and they'll cut, thousands of calories out of their diet in their day. But then the very first party they get invited to, they can't say no. So in an ideal world, like, we should really be okay with smaller weight loss consistently over time, a larger period of time that allows you to enjoy your life and go to, gatherings and events and celebrate holidays and still see progress.
Yeah, I think another thing that gets people in the wrong mindset of progress is when you see like crazy transformation photos, especially on Instagram.
Number one, a lot of those are over a larger period of time than they tell you. I just want everyone to know that.
Well, yeah, so
I want everyone to know that.
that in certain situations that's true, but I wasn't even going to go into that. So,
but that's a really common thing that most people don't know. Like, they'll tell you it's a 12-day transformation, a 30-day transformation, and it might be 2 years.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
honestly,
sure.
It's really common.
They could absolutely lie about it.
A lot of people do.
But so regardless
Sorry,
of that
I just needed to say that because most people don't know that, though. Like, that's important.
But I'd say much more important than that point, because yeah, people can absolutely lie to you.
Well, they do.
But aside from that point, what I'm trying to say is a lot of these real transformations that you see are people that are in a perfect situation to lose the weight. And so if you see somebody that goes from looking like they've got a bunch of body fat on their frame and then 3 months later they're actually shredded, you see all the muscularity through there, their body is in a perfect position to lose weight, because the reason that they had that excess body fat on their frame is because they've been eating a ton of calories, whether that was on purpose or not. If they have muscle at the end of the cut, then that is a huge calorie base or a huge piece of their metabolic rate that's going to be burning additional calories that you might not have.
Well, it also tells you they had a good, solid training foundation for their weight loss too, which most people don't have. Right.
And so when you have this ideal situation where calories are starting very, very high, you've got a base of activity underneath you, especially if it's muscle, and then you introduce a fat loss diet and you introduce more movement and cardio to create a balanced setup for fat loss, then that's where you can see fat just peel off people. And obviously they've got to be consistent. They've got to work really hard and stay on that plan. But most people think that, oh, that's where I am. I've got all this weight to lose. If I just do what that guy does, then I can lose the 30 pounds that he lost in 3 months and look really good. And it can be a totally different scenario for you, where you might be coming in to a 100-pound weight loss goal with your calories so low that realistically, we need to spend the next 6 months increasing your calories before we can even talk about fat loss. And that can be a really difficult conversation to have with somebody if they've been on this yo-yo roller coaster forever and they're just desperate to see progress.
Well, and those transformations, like Kyle said, they're very rare. And that might be 1 in 100 clients that a coach has. And if a coach has been doing this for, a few years, and especially if a coach is really popular and they go through hundreds and, thousands of clients every year, they're going to have a handful of those really dramatic transformations.
Absolutely. And it's a numbers game.
Unfortunately, that's just not very common. It's just not the reality, which isn't a bad thing. It just, again, goes back to the basics of us needing to set the foundation and make sure that your body is in a good position for fat loss, like for the transformation that you want. And, what creates that perfect scenario for someone, it's a lot more than just food and exercise. Like, there's a lot of other factors, including things like sleep quality, stress, hormones, digestion, all of these other things that we've talked about. Those are also important to be aware of. And so, again, if you're somebody who's thinking that you're doing everything right and you kind of go through all the steps we just talked about, looking at your food, looking at your exercise, and you're still kind of at a loss, you feel like you really are doing pretty good, then the next thing to look at is, okay, what about all these other factors that influence the environment that allows your body to lose fat?
Definitely. So what would your next step be if you've exhausted all this other stuff, you're logging your food properly, you're working out consistently, everything there is correct? What do we do after that?
Well, so that's kind of where all those other factors come in. So I would say looking at recovery next. So recovery from your workouts. Are you taking proper rest days? Are you sleeping well? Are you under insane amounts of stress? You know, we work with a handful of clients who are, you know, professionals who are super, super busy. Maybe they sleep 4 hours a night. There are certain things that we can work around, and then there are things that we can't. And if you really have hit a sticking point in a plateau, sometimes you do need to prioritize those other factors. You need to be able to get a little bit more sleep, or at least maybe work on the quality given the hours that you have to sleep. You need to learn how to manage your stress properly. You know, if you have a history of any abnormal lab values like blood sugar irregularities or cholesterol problems, blood pressure problems, those signal to us that there's something that's not quite right that could be standing in the way of your progress. So you do have to look at all of these other factors aside from just what you're eating and how you're moving on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, those all play a huge part. Stress is so important. Like if you've got just the messiest, stressful life, and then you're just trying to kill yourself in the gym, eat as little calories as possible, you're just adding into that mix. And stress is a total wild card. It's completely different for different people. Some people get stressed out and they can't eat a thing. Some people get stressed out and they eat everything.
Well, but stress also changes the way that your body processes that food or recovers from exercise. So, and a lot of people think, you know, mentally that they handle stress well, and maybe you do. Like maybe your awareness of how you handle stress is good, but that doesn't mean that your body is not feeling the effects. It is having an impact on your body and on your ability to build muscle or to lose fat.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think another really interesting topic would be like the lab markers. And like there might be a situation where
you could be doing
paper,
literally everything right, and maybe
perfect.
Sleep is all lined up. Maybe you have a pretty good handle on your stress, and maybe there are some things, you know, internally that are going on that you're not aware of. So that might be the time where we say, you know, maybe we should schedule a checkup. Maybe we should go get some lab work. You know, there are some common things that could be going on. You know, thyroid problems are really, really common today.
Testosterone levels in
men.
men.
Sex hormones for men and women both. Huge problems today. Huge problems. And those are all things that, like, again, they may not always show up on a basic lab panel. Like if you just go in for a general checkup, they're generally not going to take all of the, you know, hormone levels in your body. They might not even look at a thyroid level unless you ask. Most doctors at this point do because it's so common, but there are a lot of things that can be missed. And so if you really are doing everything right, if everything is lined up that we've already talked about, and I would say that a lot of these issues when it comes to lab markers typically come with symptoms associated with them. So again, if you feel like everything is lined up and maybe you're still struggling with fatigue, or, you know, your workout performance isn't great, or you have a lot of brain fog or energy issues throughout the day, that usually signals or, you know, says to us that there's probably something else going on, and some blood work might be helpful to figure that out.
Yeah. And at first glance, you might not even realize how disadvantaged you are. There's such a huge range in medicine as far as what is acceptable for certain hormones, testosterone being a huge one. Like you can have one guy, you can have one guy that literally has a third or less of the testosterone of another guy, and they're both in a healthy, normal range.
The normal range.
It's crazy.
Well, I can't remember. I mean, I'm pretty sure the range for testosterone is like 2 digits to 3 digits. So if you think about how like wide of a range that is, I can't remember what the low end.
I think the low end's 300.
Oh, is it?
And then I think the upper is like 900.
And I'm probably thinking about women.
And what is that metric? Milligrams per deciliter?
Something. Well, yeah,
it
can vary based on the lab, but
anyways,
if there's a range of 600, units, that's a huge range. You know that the person sitting here at 300 feels way different than the person who's at 900.
Right. Yeah.
Even though they're both recognized as being normal.
Well, and the influence that singular thing has on body composition changes is monumental. Like it's a totally different ball game. That's
for men and women both.
It's absolutely crazy, and I've seen it happen where guys were doing something, they were doing it right for a long time, and for whatever reason they weren't seeing the muscle growth that they wanted. Their body composition just didn't really respond well. There was a little bit of movement here and there, but not relative to the amount of work that they were putting in. Went and got a checkup, had low T, got put on hormone therapy, and then their body just changed. And it's pretty wild stuff when you're actually where you should be physiologically, because a lot of the things that we're trying to do nutrition and training wise have to take that for granted. And if what we're doing isn't working, then that's typically like the last ditch effort of seeing what's going on.
It's all about that internal environment. So when anything is dysfunctional inside or not where it should be, even if it's just slightly suboptimal, it can have huge impacts on progress towards your specific goal.
Right.
But like I said, it generally does come with some other symptoms. So you do have to have an awareness. And I think you need to understand that, maybe some of these small aches and pains, or maybe some of this brain fog, some of this fatigue, not being able to get out of bed in the morning, those aren't normal things.
Right.
So
if
you need
felt
to
terrible for a long time.
Yeah. It's not just like something you have to live with or settle for. And if you do have a weight goal or a health goal, those symptoms mean that there's probably something standing in your way, and you could put so much time and effort into your goal and still not see the progress you should based on the work you're putting in.
But I do just want to clarify. So the order that you want to do this, definitely
you want to start simply, you do.
So definitely don't think out of the gate, oh, I must have a hormone problem.
You need to go through the steps.
That's more than likely not the case. So definitely you want to start with a real nutrition and exercise routine and make sure that you're doing everything properly, because 95+% of the time, that's going to be plenty. And you're going to see progress, and that's going to get things moving. Because part of the reason why your hormones might be out of whack is because your habits suck.
Well, yeah, so, again, the basics, they feed into kind of the next level steps, right? So if you've got the basics down, generally that's going to put you in a good spot with your sleep, with your stress, with your hormones.
Right.
And if it's not, then you kind of move on to the next section and say, what could I do to optimize this?
Exactly.
Is there something else going on?
So if you've gotten past the point of doing everything terribly to now you have a real routine that on paper should be doing things really well for you, but it's still not, that's where you go to the step of like, okay, now I should probably look into lab values and maybe get a few different things tested, testosterone, thyroid, and see what's going on under the hood.
And this is, I think, really important too, is if that's the case, if you are going to the doctor to get some things tested, I wouldn't rely so much on the doctor telling you that everything is fine and normal.
Yeah, no, you have to advocate for yourself, because like we said, in that healthy range, they look at that like, no, you're good. And there are a lot of times where that's not the whole picture.
So in that situation, I would probably try to reach out to, somebody who is more familiar with optimal ranges. Some fitness coaches are really good at that. Some dietitians are really good at that. Some functional nutrition practitioners are good at that. So it would be worth the effort to find somebody who's able to interpret those based on optimal functioning versus just like normal ranges. Right. So yeah, because that can be disappointing too, is being like, okay, man, there's probably something going on inside. I feel terrible. I'm not making progress. And then you go to the doctor and they tell you that you're fine and everything's normal. And then you feel at a loss. Right. So just be careful not to put so much stock in. Because
you were just a hair over the unhealthy range.
Exactly. Just be careful. And again, be your own advocate. So obviously, those are all the situations in which you might think you're doing everything right, but maybe there are some things that you could tweak or change or optimize. So what about if you actually are, you've gone through all of these steps, you've gotten to the end, you feel like everything is lined up, food, exercise, sleep, stress, feeling great, so probably no internal issues, and you really truly are doing it right. What then?
And your lab values are
Yes.
good?
And your lab values are good. So at that point, and you're not making progress, you've kind of been stalling out for a couple weeks in a row.
It's time to start eating some more.
Well, I wouldn't even say that. I'm saying, okay, that's actually time maybe that we make a change. Maybe we need a tweak.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
What I'm saying here
I thought
is
you were talking about like at the end.
No.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is don't give up. Like
Yes.
just because you've stalled your wheels for a couple weeks in a row and you really are doing everything right, that's kind of where, you know, that's your coach's job to step in and say, you're right, you have been doing everything right. And we've seen that your body has kind of stayed the same throughout, you know, the past couple weeks. And so we need to make a small adjustment.
Right.
Maybe that's adding a little bit of cardio. Maybe that's scaling back on calories a little bit or optimizing your meal timings. So if you are working with a coach, that's not for you to worry about. If you really are being 100% compliant, that's your coach's job to step in and to make some adjustments and make some changes.
Right.
And if you aren't working with anyone, that's an opportunity for you to, again, go back to the basics and say, okay, so maybe this week I scale back by another 100 calories.
There's nothing better than for us to be able to see that you've done everything as we told you to, and then see that we haven't seen progress. So allow us to make the adjustment.
Because that is the coach's job, absolutely.
The worst thing you can do is try to adjust it yourself.
Or
because then there's a huge discrepancy between what we think's going on and what you're actually doing. And maybe the changes that you made are completely different than what we would have done had we known what was happening. So leave that, if you are working with somebody, leave that up to them, or at least discuss it with them.
Discuss it with them.
You decide that I didn't lose any weight the first 3 days of this week, so I cut my calories in half.
Or I gave up and I ate a whole pizza.
Or I did 15 hours of cardio this week. Because, it can go either way. It can go, Don't
get discouraged. Talk to your coach about it. Or, like I just said, make a small tweak. We don't expect you to lose weight week after week after week after week. Like, there are some fluctuations. So number one, did you give yourself enough time to really see if there would be any movement? And number two, if you have, then it's time to make a small change. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
That's what we expect to happen. But if you let that discourage you and make you feel bad, and then you snowball and you go off track for an entire weekend or week, then you're not really going to be in the position to know what change to make. And you might even backtrack yourself a little bit just because you didn't hold out quite long enough, or you didn't understand what that next step should look like.
It's a lifestyle. It's not a quick fix.
It's not. Well, and I think that's the other thing too, is trying to figure out, okay, did you really give yourself enough time? What do you generally base your changes on? Like, how many weeks in a row was someone at like a consistent weight before you would make a change?
More often than not, around 2. And that's typically because if we're doing everything right and 1 week goes by and we don't see a change, that might just be the scale lagging, or maybe they weighed in on the peak of their weight fluctuation for the week, so there might be some variance there. But if it's been 2 straight weeks and I know that they're doing what I want them to do, then we'll probably make an adjustment. It also depends on how long we've been working together and what the experience level of that person is. So if I can trust that they are competent in doing everything that I'm asking them to do, they've been training for a while, maybe we've been working together for a long time, and we're not seeing the progress that I would expect out of that time, then we can make adjustments a little bit more rapidly. But somebody that I don't know how their body works because we just started working together, or they have no experience doing any of this before, then I'm going to take some more time to make sure that we're actually doing what the plan says. Because if I'm making adjustments and dropping their calories by 300 or 400 from 1 week to the next because I didn't see any weight change, but really they were eating 800 calories less than I had in the plan, that does nothing for anybody.
No. That's why you have to be so honest and upfront about what your level of compliance is.
Right.
and why a coach might hold out on making any adjustments until they find that you're following it to the level that you need to be.
And why you need to log what you're doing.
Yes. Why there needs to be some sort of record of like what's happening on a daily basis, because otherwise your coach isn't going to know what changes need to be made.
Because back to doing everything right, especially if you're new to this, it's much greater chance that you're not.
Yes, I would say that that's more often the case.
The likelihood that everything really is perfect, not saying it's impossible, but it's just not, the odds aren't in your favor if you've never done this before.
Yeah. Well, and I would say for me and my clients, generally, I actually recommend a slightly longer period of time. And I would also recommend a slightly longer period of time if you're doing this on your own with no coach, like with no, feedback coming in. I generally hold my clients in a pretty stable place for at least 3 weeks, sometimes 4, again, depending on what other measures of progress we're looking at. So again, if week to week, they're feeling better, they're sleeping better, things internally are shifting, but there's no reflection on the scale, sometimes I hold out a little bit longer to see if there will be a change. Especially with women, there are a couple points throughout the month where your weight is higher just for hormonal reasons. And sometimes that can cover some of the progress we're making in the meantime. Not always, but it is pretty common. So especially with starting with, my female clients at the beginning, sometimes it takes a month or 2 for us to see what those patterns look like individually so that we know what to expect each week of the month of what their, what their weight is going to look like, how it's going to fluctuate, what those swings look like. But if you're doing this on your own, I really do recommend you err on the side of patience and taking your time and spending a little bit longer and really diving into, do you really have all of those basic foundational pieces lined up? And if you don't try and change a bunch of things and then try and kind of make it consistent after only sticking to one thing for 2 weeks.
Well, and the changes that you need to make to your plan also need to stay within the bounds of what you can continue to do.
Yes.
So like if you're at your wit's end and you're not seeing progress and then suddenly you start trying the most unrealistic routine of I'm going to work out 6 days a week and I'm going to be in the gym 2 hours a day and I'm going to eat 1,200 calories just because I want to see a pound drop. I mean, maybe you do, but you're not going to be able to keep that up.
Well, and that's too aggressive. Like when we're talking about making adjustments, making changes, they're small changes. They're not, they're not cutting 800 more calories out of your day.
Well, and it's also not the change of like, okay, I've been doing keto for a week. I didn't see anything happen. So now
After
I'm
1
going to
week,
change my entire dieting paradigm and do something else.
Now I'm going to do vegan, and now I'm going to do intermittent fasting, and now and you just keep jumping from one.
Or on the training side, I was doing 5-3-1 for a month, and I didn't see anything out of that. So then I went to 5x5, then I went to small obs, then I did the program hopping is not in your best interest.
You need to be patient and understand that the body adapts slowly for a reason, number one, but you just need to give yourself time to adjust. And time to be honest with yourself and make sure you're actually being compliant.
Yeah, absolutely. So make sure you're doing everything right.
So if you think you're doing everything right,
make sure you
just dive into it. I think it really is just about awareness, right? So again, for those people who send me a check-in and say, I did really good this week, do you know what that means? What does I did good mean to you? So I think it really comes down to, when I get a message like that, to me that says, you don't really have the awareness to be more specific for me. And that's a barrier. Yeah. That's what you need to work on, is really understanding what compliance looks like, what doing everything right looks like.
Yeah. How much do you actually know about what you did? Can you tell me where your macros were during the day? Can you tell me how much activity you did in the day? Yeah. And just being accountable to that, having a record of that. Double checking that your serving sizes are right, your macros for each food are correct. It's all coming together the way that you think it is. And then running through the steps like we listed out if you are doing things properly.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. If there is anything that you guys would like us to cover in the future, feel free to reach out to myself at hypertrofit.com, and you can find Alexa at therootedrd.com, and we'll see you guys again next week.
We'll see you guys next week.